Okay, let's get started. So again, welcome to this session presented by the New Jersey Association of Library Assistants. My name is Crystal Hooper, and I work for the Somerset County Library System in New Jersey as a branch manager, and I'm also NJALA's digital liaison. And you're here today for part 3 of our series, Having Your Voice Heard, Effectively Communicating your public service, and today we're going to focus on interpersonal skills through empathy. While we are getting underway, please keep yourself muted throughout the presentation. You can continue to introduce yourself in the chat box. And while our panelists are answering questions, you can add any questions you may have into the chat box. I will monitor it throughout the program, and I can interrupt the group so we can address your conversation addition as we go along. Today, though, you are going to have a special moderator who is Karina Gonzalez, and I'm going to turn over the room to her. And Karina, you can introduce yourself. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Karina Gonzalez. I'm an adult services librarian at the Piscataway Public Library, and I have the honor of being your moderator for today's panel. If you have any questions, please just pop them into the chat, and Crystal will jump in and interrupt me. Just so you know, I can read the chat, although it's a little difficult to access. All right, so shall we jump right in? Oops. There we go. Okay, so our first question is for Ashley. Ashley, what is the difference between sympathy and empathy?
So first, I will introduce myself. I'm Ashley Mitchell. I'm an adult services librarian at Camden County Library System in South Jersey. It's right outside of Philadelphia, just in case you don't know where that is. I also lead my library's diversity and inclusion team. So for the first question, I want to point out that there are similarities between the two, and sympathy is a term that was used a lot earlier than empathy. Empathy is a newer term. And both of them are good things, but one takes things a step further. So sympathy is when something happens to a person and you express feelings of sorrow. It could be feelings of pity. It could be just, kind of saying, I feel bad for you and your situation. Empathy takes it a step further because you're not just feeling bad for the person or having feelings of sorrow towards the person and what they're going through. You're also trying to put yourself in their shoes and, try to find ways to connect and say, like, not just that I hear you, but that, I can understand what you're going through. And that provides a deeper connection where, you can listen to the person and really, really listen and engage and, not necessarily making it about you having the same situation as them, but also just really showing that you care and kind of just taking things a step further to try to help the person if you can. So I do want to point out that sometimes you may not be able to show as much empathy or direct empathy. And what I mean by that, and we may get into this a little bit later, but sometimes, like for example, I just found out that one of my neighbors, their father passed away. So I have sympathy definitely for them. Empathy is a little different because my dad is still around. So I would never say, like, I know what you're going through because I don't know. But I have lost my mom. So I do know what it's like to lose a parent. So I can say, I know what it's like to lose a parent. And that's a way that I can empathize. So that's one way to think about like the differences. And I don't know if Milena or Ruth has anything to add, but that is my explanation.
I would, however, love for Milena to introduce themselves. I apologize for not saying that earlier. So Milena, please tell me about yourself.
Oh, my favorite topic. No, I'm just kidding. Hi, I'm Melina Squitrini. I use they, them pronouns, and I am a youth services librarian with a focus on teens at the Highland Park Public Library. And empathy is actually my favorite topic to speak about. So I think that for me, the big difference between sympathy and empathy is empathy is making sure that you're putting yourself at the same level. So you're not that in sympathy you're looking down on someone, but it's more like talking to them as an equal and making sure that you are sharing feelings with them instead of just putting your own feelings on someone. That's it for me.
Thank you. And Ruth, if you could introduce yourself as well, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ruth Ware, and I'm Associate Director of Libraries at Essex County College. And as a first-generation student and now librarian, I pretty much just agree with what both Ashley and Melina had said, in particular, because there's no doubt that empathy is an action word.
Excellent. Thank you, Ruth. All right, let's go on to question number 2, which is also for Ashley. What exactly are interpersonal skills?
So this is a term that I actually had a hard time thinking about because it's just kind of something that you do. But I did find a term in one of our resources that to me is, and I'm going to read this because to me, it kind of like describes it succinctly. So interpersonal skills are all the behaviors that allow you to work well with others, whether it's your boss, co-workers, direct reports, clients, customers, or anyone else you come into contact with. So one of the biggest interpersonal skills that you probably definitely practice without knowing it is communication skills. And, being empathetic in your communication, paying attention to body language, seeing, if, and I'm not saying you have to see if people are having a good day or a bad day. I'm not saying all of that, but just if someone looks uncomfortable, you know, um, make sure like you're not saying something that makes them uncomfortable, or just make sure that your workplace is as harmonious as possible. I don't want to get into too many details, 'cause I think some of these things are going to get into later on. Just doing what you can to have good interpersonal skills, I think is best. You can't control everyone else's behavior, but you can control how you act and how you react to things in the office. Other interpersonal skills are teamwork, because working as a team, you're going to do that in most workplaces. Um, Problem solving, even like negotiation skills, things like that. When you look at articles about it online, there are a lot of times it is geared towards this is how you get a job, show that you have great interpersonal skills. But it's not just about getting the job. When you're in the job, you have to continue this because you're going to be working with people. Everybody's different. Some people are going to have good days and bad days, but how you deal with that, and this is at every level, not just, managers, supervisors, how you interact with your coworkers, that is really going to determine how positive your workspace and your work environment and your work experience is going to be. Melina, did you have anything to add since you're the empathy expert?
I just, you talked about, knowing how you react. And I think that learning your own emotional intelligence is super important. And just, knowing how you react and knowing if you are the right person to talk to people about certain things, is really helpful in communication.
All right, thank you. Now let's move on to question number 3. This one is going to be for Ruth. Does being an extrovert, introvert, or ambivert play into this?
Yes, I mean, I think it comes back to that first question about interpersonal skills. So it does matter that you are self-aware and you have to decide at how exactly do you describe yourself. In particular, for example, as an extrovert, one of the things that I have to be mindful of, especially coming into a new space where there are specific ideas of what a librarian is supposed to be. And I say that because we are in a profession of transition. And this goes both from our patrons as well as folks that, for example, might be, in a position for 30 and 40 years, which is a big part of the conversation in our profession. And what I had to learn how to do is to take a step back because where I'm usually, how they say the social butterfly, in certain spaces that actually can come across as aggressive. And so it helps and it matters that you are able to say to yourself, am I an extrovert? Am I an introvert? And for my introverted good friends, I say that you have so much to offer. Those of us, it's easy for folks to take for granted that the extroverted person who might be talking more is the natural leader in the group. When in actuality, I could say, I think in my experience, my introverted good friends are the ones, because they listen before they speak, and because they're comfortable waiting to hear all of the views, that there's so much that we can learn. And that's actually, I feel, a true leadership opportunity. And for the managers here that have staff where you are learning about different preferences, how people learn and how they express themselves in the office, I, highly recommend being mindful to encourage that, there are the leadership skills that are required as we evolve our interpersonal capabilities, because the key thing is to be able to use them for each situation that we confront, hopefully be an extrovert when necessary and be an introvert when necessary, but it's about self-awareness.
As an introvert, I thank you for that response, Ruth. Does anyone else have anything to add to that one? Okay, so we're going to move on to question number 4, which actually we would like all of our panelists to answer, starting with Ashley. Who deserves empathy?
So that is kind of a trick question because everyone deserves empathy. It shouldn't be something that you save just for certain people. And just because you may not be able to directly, like I was mentioning earlier, just because you may not be able to directly relate to someone's experience doesn't mean that you can't find something within it to be empathetic about. Lena?
Sure. I think that the people who we most don't want to give empathy to, the difficult patrons, the coworkers who are always causing us problems, I think that those are the people who need empathy the most. The ones who are cranky and you're like, please leave. You you have to take the extra step. Sadly, it's our job to show empathy to that person, be patient to that person because they probably need it more than we do. And I know that Ruth has a lot to say on that too.
Yes, because I think because I'm a second career librarian, and when I think of really, coming from industry, meaning coming from corporate business, New York City, and the expectations that I came from as a headhunter where, I worked on commission and was sales, that, it really is unfair that every other industry that is right smack in this technology age, which is where librarians sit, right, in terms of serving communities in this information area that we're in, that I think that the culture of the profession needs needs time to be able to evolve into what's expected today. Everything from our job descriptions to the fact that, there are so many folks that have been in libraries for over 10, 20 years. And because their job description hasn't changed in that block of time, that here we are saying to them that actually, no, your job description technically has to change every 6 months because we're looking at the statistics and our patron numbers and so on. So I really feel that we have as a profession where we really need to understand what the role of empathy to address the way our profession is evolving. And in that space is the fact that we are multi-generational. I wanted to highlight here that just like because I remember being the youngest person in an office and trying to do my best and doing well. I think that many of our folks who have 30 and 40 and 50 years in one job in one location have a lot of experience and have so much to bring to the institution, but there needs to be a mindfulness about how do you include those folks that only have 3 months, 6 months in an organization, and how do you create relationships and opportunities for these generations to come together. And so, yes, I think as a profession, this is really a timely conversation.
Thank you, Ruth, and all of our panelists. All right, moving on to question number 5. This one's from Elena. Why should I practice empathy?
So I think first and foremost, it's the right thing to do. It's just good to be nice to people, and treat them with respect. But for us, I know that for NJALA, a lot of you are library assistants, work in circulation, and other paraprofessional jobs. And this is how you're going to build the relationships that are going to help you build your profession. If you're showing that you are going to be treating patrons and other colleagues with respect and care, they're going to want to be like on your resume as references later. Like I know if you asked me to be a reference for you, but I saw that you didn't care about the patrons, I'm not going to be like, oh my God, yes. Like I'm gonna be like, are you me? I've seen you work. But like I just was a reference for someone that I used to work with. And I could say that this person showed great empathy to patrons, was always there to go the extra mile and go with them. And so I was thrilled to be able to do that for them. And it's really, how you're humanizing people. Some people come in to our libraries and they are not doing great. They need resources. They need like anything. And just even if you're not the person to give them the resources, if you're the person that takes them over to a librarian, I think it's really helpful for you to be like, hey, yeah, we can definitely help you come this way versus like going over and being like, oh my God, can you believe this person came in here and they smell, they, are confused, they can't use a computer, because a lot of our patrons don't know how to do those things. And it's our job to show them that it's okay and that we're here for them. And to feel cared for, which is really what anyone wants. And then really it'll make you feel better. Once you know that you were kind to someone, like that's good for yourself. So I always say, just do it. If you don't have a reason, just do it for yourself. You'll feel better afterwards.
So this goes right into question number 6, which is also from Elena. So how do I show empathy?
Sure. So I feel like I know everyone's heard of Ryan Dowd's Pennies in a Cups at this point because I talk about him constantly. And that's a really good starting point. So Pennies in a Cup is basically front loading empathy to get something later, but you don't need to get something later. But it is nice if you need someone to do something for you. Stop yelling, please leave the library. Why are you shaking things? Like if they know you because you were kind to them, because you smiled at them, and please, if I have one more person tell a woman to smile, I'll lose it. But just smile, not because they tell you to, but because it's their job. And just, treat them how they want to be treated. And if you make a mistake, apologize. We're not perfect. You're not perfect. The patrons are not perfect. If you're talking to a patron and you misgender them and they tell you, say thank you and apologize and then move on. Don't make it about yourself. For the love of all that is good, please don't make it about yourself. And just use, it's called nonviolent communication, 2-second Google search. It just basically talks about how everyone is doing the best they can at that moment. So even if you see someone not having their best moment, they're probably doing the best that they can for themselves. So just, talk to them like they're a real person, and not at their worst. So yeah, I think that'll be good. Anybody else?
Yes, if I can add to that, I know when I first came into the library industry, was at Rutgers. I started out as a cataloger. It was my first job out. And I remember a faculty member, which I'm sure some of you have heard, the famous hierarchy of the of the college system. You know, faculty members are sort of up here and everybody else is down here, which is endemic of most of higher ed. But anyway, one of the things that I wanted to highlight was, you know, someone pointed out that I had made a mistake. And my answer to them, and it really, you know, and we're going to talk more about this in a few, but if you're not making mistakes, then what are you doing? And getting comfortable with that, that it's okay that, you know, you may, you know, that you forgot something or something wasn't done in a specific way. Being comfortable with making mistakes is such an important part of this, again, this environment that we actually work in day to day.
And feeling safe enough to do that depends on your supervisors and management, and making sure that it is okay to have those 1,000 mistakes that lead to success. All right, question 7, also from Melina. Do you need to be an empathetic person to show empathy?
You do not. So I know that everything that I'm talking about sounds so easy for me because I am naturally empathetic. And that is awesome for me, except when I'm crying, which happens all the time. But you do not have to be an empathetic person to show empathy to other people. You just have to remember that it is your job. Kaylee Iacovetta, who works at the Philadelphia Library, talks about how empathy is a role-playing game. You know, immerse yourself in D&D. Just pretend that you are an empathetic person. Just be nice to people because it's your job if you don't want to be nice to people because you're a nice person. And that's fine. You don't have to be naturally empathetic. Like, it's absolutely does not make you a worse staff member or worse librarian. It's fine if you don't want to know what your friend Cindy's cat is doing this weekend. That's fine. You can still ask. Like, it's not going to hurt you to ask them. And if they tell you, great. If they say, oh, nothing, also great. And then you don't have to hear about it. But I want to know what my friends' cats are doing because I love cats. And I want to know what their kids are doing because that's just who I am. But that doesn't make it better than you who don't want to know. Totally fine. Everyone is equal and that's totally fine. And you can just pretend because it's your job.
And like someone said in the chat, consider it sort of like a script for you know your cues and what to say when. All right, number 8. This one is going to be for Ashley. What are some benefits of receiving empathy?
So when I looked at this question, I was actually going to answer both parts, giving and receiving. I'll see what I have time for, but I'll start with receiving. So when you receive empathy, it can instantly help you feel better about what it is that you're going through. It can help you feel less alone. Sometimes when we're going through things that really, really have strong emotions attached to it that we may not be able to navigate on our own, just receiving empathy from somebody, even if it's just simple as, you know, I see you, you know, I have an idea of what you're going through. Is there anything I can do to help? You know, it goes a little bit beyond just sympathy, where it's just like, I feel sorry for you. Please accept my kind thoughts, and then you move on. So it's just that putting that extra effort in to really, really not just show that you care, but take steps too and actions. That I think Fruit said earlier that empathy is an action. So action word, or you know what you said, like something like that. But you know, it's basically something that you really want to take seriously if you're going to be empathetic. And it's something that you do have to work at. So your first time may not be, you may feel like you were lagging, but maybe you didn't say that. And sometimes, as empathetic as I am, sometimes I leave interactions thinking, oh, I could have did more, I could have did this, but you did the best you could at the time. So see, that's even me showing empathy for people who may have had a hard time showing it. Like, that's what, if we do that for each other, we can help each other out. So, you know, the benefits of receiving empathy would be just feeling better, more positive thoughts, you know, feeling that someone really actually cares about you and your experience. and also not feeling like it's being minimized. Or sometimes with sympathy, it could just be, I feel sorry for you, let's talk about something else. But it's just like, taking that time to actually see how that person is feeling. As far as giving empathy, it can make you feel better too. It can be empowering. It can be an opportunity to share your story if it's appropriate. That's something you want to be really careful with, but it can give you that opportunity to actually really say, I can relate to this, but only if that person is comfortable and is in a place to hear your story, because you don't want it to sound like you're topping that person's experience. But I think we're going to talk about that later in the presentation. And the last thing I'll mention is personally for me, it's giving empathy is actually like fulfilling for me. My undergrad degree is in psychology, and I did a year of grad school in counseling psychology. And one thing we had to do in grad school was pick a theoretical orientation, which is kind of like the kind of therapy we want to do. And I looked through all the different types and I found one. And it's funny because I always forget whose theory this was, but there is an article about it in the resource guide if you want to read about it. And they talk about unconditional positive regard. And that is something that therapists do to kind of show that, they are accepting, even if you have made a mistake or done something. It's kind of like, I hear you, I see that you made it. What can we do to, make sure this doesn't happen in the future, kind of thing, but starting off from a positive place. And I'm not talking about like toxic positivity, but just kind of just accepting that people make mistakes. So that term literally sticks in my mind, and I try to give people unconditional positive regard when I can. I'm not saying that's possible all the time, but to me, there's a connection with empathy and giving people the benefit of the doubt, I guess, if you want to put it in simpler terms. Elena?
Yeah, I think that really just feeling heard is just huge. And just having someone check in with you, even just having the feeling of someone being like, oh, they thought about me, like brightens my whole day. And I think it's just like a nice surprise when you might be like, oh, work, but then you're like, oh, this person thought about me. That's so nice. Ruth?
I'd say for all of the leaders and branch managers that I saw in the chat, I think it's also thinking about how an opportunity to connect with your staff is the benefit to receiving empathy. And I know it's tougher in an environment where more traditional roles still exist with regard to manager, supervisor, and so on. And I'm going from top to bottom in this case, but our goal is hopefully to get to that space where we're all the same, right? But I do think that there's a chance for those already in leadership roles to be able to be aware of this so that we can give others a real opportunity to see where how we learn from them, how we learn from us, no matter what the title.
Thank you. We're moving on to question number 9. This one is also for Ruth. How can I improve my body language when needing to show empathy?
So coming back to that self-awareness, I mentioned I consider myself an extrovert, so being aware to hold back, I used to be a hugger. This is 30 years ago, right? We say, oh, I'm a hugger, right? And some of you might still be that, right? But you want to be very aware of things like that, right? The sort of the standard, and I'm so excited about our resources list because it includes a podcast about communication, but that eye contact when most of us are walking around with our phones, keeping in mind too, and some of you, this is sort of communication 101, right? That you're putting the phone down, that you're actually facing the person when you're speaking to them. For most of us who had that, sort of standard how to meet and greet, right? When you see a patron, for example, and how to address, going back to Melania's example of, let's say, an unhoused patron who's walking in, who again, unfortunately there is they walk in and then you have that particular body odor or whatever it is, and managing, how your face is, how you're reacting, even if it means, as I had in my public library experience, literally coming away from the reference desk to be able to essentially escort them, or bring them to another part of the library so that I could essentially make them comfortable, but also work with security to figure out what we were going to do in terms of what they needed. I mean, to the extent where we even brought to them the newspaper that they wanted. I actually brought it over to them. So it's really about being mindful about your facial expression, where are your eyes, where are your hands, right? And also, when we had mentioned when we were getting together, which made me think of it, for most of us who are working in cubicles and open spaces, being mindful that even though, yes, everything is technically open, that actually respecting folks' space, especially from managers to staff, being mindful that even though someone might have sort of a family photograph, that they may or may not expect you to come over and look over their shoulder and sort of point to that picture for whatever reason. Those are the kind of things that you want to keep in mind in terms of your body language and keeping in mind empathy and respect for the evolution of how we communicate now.
I'm learning so much.
I
Sorry, go
also
ahead,
just
Melina.
I just also wanted to add that we can still be showing empathy while we're de-escalating something. So if you're in a situation where maybe face on isn't safe, like you're trying to test your boundaries, see if you can remove someone from a situation or just kind of gently move them away, and you need to do like a 15% 15-degree turn so that you have like safe escape route if needed. And again, please don't put yourself in these situations if you are not comfortable with it. But you can still be asking people to leave while showing them that you respect them as a human and they are not wrong. Their actions are wrong. So just making sure that you are putting that across, like if you need to have someone leave, that you are being like, I hope we can do better tomorrow, friend. Like, just confirming that you still see them as an equal person, even though they do need to leave for whatever reason.
And keep in mind that just because they don't show you that specific eye contact body language doesn't necessarily mean they're being disrespectful. They could have a neurodivergency that makes that difficult for them. Ruth, what were you going to say?
Yes, thank you for that. Because the example that I had posed, I should have said that. I didn't feel uncomfortable. I felt, and also they were familiar to me, but because the moment they walked in, I mean, and I'm sure I don't think anyone who has had exposure with unhoused, that there are instances where you have one person you actually might have seen before, but more than one patron reacts to when they come into the space. And because it happened that as a reference librarian, I had all of the computers, it was where patrons came to use computers, that in that instance, that's how I addressed it. But again, to your point, Melina, that I definitely felt comfortable. And also, we already had sort of a way of working with security so that he could feel comfortable. And technically everybody was comfortable because you'll notice I didn't actually escort them off the floor. I just made it a point to make sure that he was comfortable, despite what was obvious, and and made him comfortable, and it was fine actually. So it was a good situation. That's why I wanted to bring it up.
All right, excellent. So this next question is for every single panelist. We're going to start with Ashley. Should I share my experiences to seem empathetic or not?
So I kind of touched on that earlier in one of the previous questions. It is very tricky. And I'm going to be honest, it was so hard for me to not share my experiences, because a lot of times people do come to me for advice or they just want to talk. And sometimes I had to realize that this person just wants to share their experience and I need to just let them have that moment. And sometimes if people want to know your experience, they may actually ask you. Or they may say, like, I've heard that you went through this, and then you can share it. But it's hard because, like, with my best friend, we kind of will do that. We'll be like, yeah, I've been through that too. But we have that established thing that that's okay. But if it's like a coworker in the workplace, you don't always have that. So it's, in my opinion, it's better to start by listening and then just kind of see where the conversation goes. But, it's everybody's different on that. So I would love to hear what Melena thinks about that.
So this is a tricky question for me because I know we talked about neurodivergence that Karina brought up. I have ADHD and I get really excited to share my story because that is how I empathize with people. And I have to control it because otherwise I will not only dominate that conversation and every conversation, but I will completely talk over everyone because I'm just so excited that I can be empathetic by sharing what I have to say. And that's just not appropriate. And also it leads to oversharing, which people don't want all the time. And so you need to make sure that you are sharing a story that A, the people feel comfortable with, and B, the people that you're talking to want to hear. Because you may think that your stories are on the same level, but that doesn't mean that they do, or that they necessarily would feel better knowing your story because you're two different people. And you don't have to respond to whatever that they're talking about the same way that they did. There's no wrong answer there. But just make sure that you are being empathetic and not just being excited to overshare. And as an empathetic ADHDer, I am like, oh my God, I'm sparkly. Let me share that with you. And that's not always actually helpful. So just make sure that they are comfortable hearing what you have to say. Ruth?
Yeah, I'm with you, about being sparkly and or wanting to help, trying to be in the space where, oh, I could fix it, or can I fix it? And yes, I think you have to gauge who, it's the best, I feel, to defer to that person. And it takes practice. It takes practice. But that's where, this whole idea of how well are you self-aware, going back to who you are and what matters to you, that can make a difference.
Thank you. Question 11. This one is for Melena. How do I tell a colleague that they lack empathy?
So first of all, you should tell them while practicing empathy. Don't be like, hey, what's your deal? Not helpful because you will get their hackles up immediately. So maybe they said something. If they said something that's completely unacceptable and you need to go to management, you should do that. Please don't try to take upon like punishing someone in the workplace if that's not your job. So just because you're like, I know about empathy and I'm gonna solve this, don't do that. Use the proper channels for severe issues, especially if you might think that someone needs to get written up. But if that's not what it was, and they were just like maybe a little rude, or you can tell they're having a bad day, see if they need to be tapped out. Sometimes people just, there are patrons that I don't want to be around, and they're not many, but there are some that it's just not good for my mental health to be around them. Some of them, being a non-binary people in this town, like person in this town, some people don't like that I exist. I do not have to deal with those patrons. That is my safety that is involved, and I am allowed to go somewhere else and have someone do that. So if I see that person and I go, nope, and just walk away, that's not appropriate. That's not part of my job. But I fortunately have colleagues that understand this. And if they see that that person is coming in, they will come and tap out with me. So I don't have to do that. Does that mean that like they can be like, hey, you weren't being very nice? I know. And I'm doing the best I can. And that goes with everyone. If someone comes in and they're like, oh, wow, this guy again, and you just know that they don't get along, step in for them. Just be like, hey, I know that that guy's not your favorite. You want me to take care of him? And they'll probably be like, oh my God, yes, thank you. And then they'll remember. People will remember the good things that you have done for them. So again, don't jump on their case. Speak to them with empathy or use different channels. But yeah, I think treating people with care is definitely the right way to go about things. And again, don't take that upon yourself to reprimand them if that's what they need, because that's just probably not your job. Anybody else?
I have personally had to tell some colleagues that they lack empathy. There's one in particular where it's a joke, but it's not a joke, that once a year they're upset with me because I've told them that's something that they said lacks empathy, and they're not used to hearing that. But sometimes I would actually really have to say it, because sometimes the lack of empathy was directed towards one of my direct reports. But even though I'm not a supervisor anymore for the moment, I do still interact with that person. So sometimes they may say some things and I may have to say, can we think about another way to say that? Or I know you're going through something right now, but that other person's experience is valid too, because that person has a tendency, when you start speaking, they start talking about themselves. And it did happen recently where they asked me how I was doing, because my mom passed away in May, and I think I got 2 sentences out, and then they started talking about themselves again. So I had to be like, but there were other people because we were all having lunch together. So I had to kind of stop her and finish my story, because I had a little bit of a story that I was telling about something that happened. So sometimes you're just going to have to do it. But, I have a little bit more confidence in doing it from being in situations where I had to. But like Milena said, you can always, if there's like a supervisor or someone else, you can, say this person is doing things that aren't appropriate, and, the supervisor or anyone above can take action on it. And like, don't be afraid or feel bad about that, because lack of empathy sometimes can really cause like a hostile work environment.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say it's not tattling. If you are not comfortable dealing with the situation that needs to be dealt with, it's okay for you to go get your manager. It's not like we're not at a childhood playground. Like, if you need backup, you can get backup. We're all adults and we need to be caring for each other. So don't feel bad because you went over someone's head, because it was necessary.
Excellent. All right, question 12. This one is for Ruth. How do I mentor a colleague so they can show empathy?
Well, I mean, just to follow up, this is a great follow-up question, right? I think it goes in 2 ways. First is, hopefully, when you're faced with that situation of needing to be empathetic, knowing how to defer to what the situation is, like, and in the example that I had used earlier about ageism, the idea that being mindful about the new language of today, which I know, there can be a whole conversation about, well, how come we have to change the way we speak? And especially folks, that are very clear that I've been doing this for 40 years, and why does it have to change, right? And so I think that on the first, not only can we model the behavior when the time comes that we could defer to someone else, but then the other is really, for those of us in managerial roles, being able to provide opportunities for staff to take the lead. And in the example that I mentioned earlier about making mistakes, that once we are able, and when I say mistakes, there's certainly a difference between, even though mistakes are in degrees, by and large, if we really look at what we do on a day-to-day basis, I feel everything can be rectified, short of the things that, again, end up needing, someone does something that truly is so abhorrent in behavior that they need to be written up and so on. But we have a chance here to mentor on those 2 fronts. A is the example, and B, hopefully, being comfortable to encourage folks to take the lead with or without the title.
Question 13 for Ashley. What happens when empathy doesn't work?
So I think this question could be interpreted a couple different ways, but the way I interpreted it is what happens if you show empathy towards a person and it isn't received well? How do you handle that? So that has happened in the past with sometimes, because it depends on your personality. Like I am a very positive thinker. Some people may say it's toxic because I always try to see the positivity in things. But for me, that's what helps me get through hard times. If I can find something positive or something to focus on, that, it will kind of make the harder things in the situation easier to deal with. So sometimes that way of thinking may play a part in how I show empathy. So sometimes I may say, well, here's a positive here. Okay, you may not have gotten that job, but here's this job that came out that may be a better fit for you. And this is something that has actually happened where the person was just so upset at the time that they just, couldn't really see that. And it was just, I kind of ran out of things to say. So it's just kind of more so like, well, if you need help, I'm here. And sometimes you may have to leave it at that. You're still showing empathy. You're doing the best you can. But, you know, it's, it's hard because you want to be empathetic and there's different ways to be empathetic, but sometimes people just aren't in a place to receive it. And that's just a part of life that sometimes you cannot directly relate to something like I was saying earlier. So your attempts may not be seen as sincere, or the person may feel that you can't really relate. But you do the best you can and accept that you tried and you did what you could. Now, if there was something that you could have did better, did differently, absolutely reflect on that and do better next time. But that's the way I interpret the question. I'm kind of curious to see how my other panelists thought about the question because I might have interpreted this wrong.
I think that there's different ways to interpret it. For me, I know that working with teenagers, sometimes when you're like showing empathy to them, they will snap back at you because it makes them uncomfortable because they're not used to it, some of them, or they're not used to people caring about them, which is terrible, but it happens. And so sometimes sometimes you got to wear them down. I'm like a big proponent of like front loading empathy. Like if a kid comes in and they're like, ugh, like just keep pushing it on them. I have a kid who like, oh God, he was just really annoyed by my existence and I've had to, you know, get him to leave the library before for inappropriate language towards coworkers, stuff like that. But every time I'm always like, okay, see you tomorrow. Like, and eventually I wore him down where at least he like says hi to me. Instead of like ignoring me, which is something, and will actually like respond to me if I come up and like kind of do a lean against the computer he's working at, just be like, how was school today? And then it's fine, thanks. And I'm like, oh, he said thanks. Best day ever. So yeah, that's what I'm seeing for me is just like if it doesn't work, try again tomorrow. And then just keep trying until one of you breaks and hopefully it's them and then they'll love you forever. No, they won't, but at least they'll respect you maybe, which is really my goal. Ruth, what do you think?
I did take the sort of the management approach, the idea that if you're, especially for some of us, we really are in a situation where we need to change the culture of a team. And so, when empathy doesn't work for those individuals that really can affect an entire team, this is where what you said, Melina, really, what are the structures in place that can help you guide them towards professional development, towards, really pushing folks to continue to evolve their skills, their communication skills, because we're all in this together with regard to, these heightened expectations of how we need to communicate to create open and inclusive spaces.
All right, this next question is for everybody. Starting with Ashley, what if interpersonal skills are interpreted as harassment?
So for me, this is something that I'm actually still learning more about because I haven't really experienced that. But you know, clearly that's not a good thing. And the problem is that someone may not know that they are harassing or making a person uncomfortable with their interpersonal skills or lack thereof. So it could be like anything. It could be just you saying things like somebody could say me being positive is toxic. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but it's something to think about. I have kind of toned down with it because I don't want people to think that you have to think positive. And, for me, when I've experienced loss or something, that's how I cope. But that may not be how the next person copes. And if I keep saying that, I could possibly be making them uncomfortable. So, it's all about looking at your behaviors and, you may think this is a good interpersonal skill to have, but maybe it's something you want to tone back on or maybe do with your friends and family. That's the only thing I could think of. So I'm sure Milena has something.
For me, I'm just I tend to be overly friendly and kind of flirtatious. And that can definitely be a dangerous line to cross. People generally think it's harmless, but if I'm making someone uncomfortable, I do need someone to tell me. So I think that that is just like learning to take feedback. So if someone's like, I think maybe we were flirting with that person. I probably don't know that I was because I, am neurodivergent, sparkly, and I'm just like, everyone is so great. I want to talk to everyone and hello, everybody. And they're like, oh my God, stop. So yeah, I think that really if people are thinking that your skills are actually not the best as far as boundaries and just take, that as constructive. And if you are seeing that in the workplace and you see that you're making someone is feeling like they are being targeted by someone who's maybe showing them a little bit too much attention, you can definitely step in. And it's the same thing with people making people uncomfortable. Like if you have a patron that thinks that they're being super friendly, to your colleague and they're making them uncomfortable, step in. Like I'm never uncomfortable. If people are making someone uncomfortable, I am right there. Hey, friend, what's up? I can help you. And then they're like, oh God, this again? Yes, this again. Don't talk to my friend. I will help you. Come over here away from my friend because you're making everyone uncomfortable. So, definitely knowing each other. And that's again with the emotional literacy, just knowing your how you're feeling on things and what your skill sets are. I am a great fight friend and I will get right into conflict. I'm not afraid of anyone, which is not necessarily a good thing. I'm just like, what's up, buddy? I have no issues. So like that is not always great, but if you know that there are people that are great at de-escalation, and then there's some people that are great in conflict interference, and I am great with conflict, but not always de-escalating. So know your skills in your team and know that you can be the one to do one thing and someone else can be the one to do something else. And that was just a beautiful example of how ADHD brain works in a big circle. So let's Ruth take it away.
Yeah, I mean, I think also, I think that's why I thought of the question about the cubicle, because again, if we say we are in a service profession, and like you said, I would probably describe myself just like the way you do, Melina, honestly, sparkly, bubbly, loud, and you had said this in terms of my public library experience, the idea of being comfortable in both conflict and in de-escalation, right? I think that probably the biggest thing that I have observed, especially for all of us that have come back from COVID-19 and our young people, like my son was a freshman in COVID, he actually was online, is that because the communication skills have changed, this whole idea of body distance and being mindful of that sort of that central space. I mean, I'm from New York City, so there's sort of a further understanding for me, I think, even how you stand on the platform on the subway. Um, is something that we're hopefully continuing to evolve and learn about. But I do think that we in this case we do want to speak to how folks have changed coming back from COVID, where there was so much isolation, and how folks communicate and respond to other people, or respond to sort of coming back to, we'll say normal, if that's what we're going to call it. That it makes a difference for those of us in a service profession.
Question 15, this one is for Ashley. How do leaders lean into empathy to better their teams?
So you can lean into empathy from any level, at any level, whether you're a supervisor or not. But I will speak from experience. I have, I think, about 15 years of supervisory experience, not management experience, but I've always been that person right below the manager that kind of is like, I call it like the enforcer, because managers say, we want to do this. And then as a direct supervisor, you have to kind of manage the office and make sure that people are working well together. So a lot of times the direct supervisors are the first people to see when something's not quite right. So one thing that I had to do in my last department, where I was like the unofficial office manager, was to kind of make sure that people were empathetic when they spoke to each other, and make sure that, as far as like interpersonal skills, that people were working together well. And I was in the tech services department, which was behind the scenes, ordering books, receiving them, processing them. You have deadlines, all kinds of things. So sometimes it was not a good day. um, there were times where books didn't go out by the street date and I wasn't there, and then things happened and I had to come back in and clean up, things like I felt like I was always doing damage control. But I realized that if I keep doing damage control and not addressing the issues, then this stuff is going to keep happening and then I'm going to be stressed out. So what I decided to do, just every interaction I had, I tried to show empathy and show that I cared. Because I think what was happening is that there were a lot of things happening in the staff members in the department's personal lives as well. And then working in a high stress at times department, that just doesn't go well. So, when we had end of year ordering, I would really make sure to take time to check in with everybody. If I saw that somebody just looked like they had a lot on their mind, I wouldn't actually say, do you want to talk? I don't want to do that. But what I would say is, oh, how's your day going? Things like that. I try to remember things like birthdays, important events. People recognize when their supervisor or department head remembers things about them. Even when I was supervising a department in circulation, I had 16 direct reports and I think 32 like indirect. Like, I could be in charge of the whole department if the department head wasn't there. And I tried to learn what I could about each person. And I'm not saying it was easy, but it definitely helped when they were having a bad day. And I may say, I remember this happened. Then we talk. And then you could tell that the person feels relief that they're not going to get in trouble for having a bad day, and that they're seen and they feel heard. So one thing I will say is that doesn't mean you have to be a therapist. And that's something I had to learn too, because I actually wanted to be a therapist in the past. But I realized that that's a lot to take in. I don't really want to have these high client loads that some therapists have now. So that's why I like being a librarian, because I can kind of listen and be empathetic, but there's a lot more boundaries and a lot less that I have to do for, staff and patrons. So, that's another thing. You want to be very careful with that. You can listen to people and empathize, but you cannot become a therapist, because now it could also be seen as you're showing favoritism towards that person. And that's not good either. So to make a long story short, just there's little ways to show empathy just by showing that you care about the person in their life, and just simple as ask them how their day is going, or is there anything they can help you with. Monthly meetings are actually really good. My direct reports didn't want them, but we still had them. because they would say, oh, we don't feel like going. But as soon as we got in that room, we started talking about things. So we're going to continue to have them because I need to check in and make sure you guys are okay. And I even checked in with people in the department that work my direct reports because we're all working together. So, that's one way to look at it. But I don't know if Milena or Ruth had anything to add based on their experiences.
I just wanted to say that you are not a bad manager if you need to write down the things that you want to remember, what you want to ask about, because if you tell me something, I will truly care about it, but will also forget immediately. And if you tell me a date that's important and you do not see me write it down, I will forget it. So, send me something through email because I will have it written down. Or have me put it in my calendar. And also me trying to remember that I want to write things down doesn't always work. But just because your brain doesn't retain the information doesn't mean that you don't want to, or that it wasn't important to you. So write things down, and that doesn't make it any worse than just your brain remembering it because we're all different. Bruce?
Yeah, and I also sort of to continue what you had said about what we can do. I mean, I think for my experience, the idea that my expectations as a manager is that you are taking 1 hour break for your lunch, 1 hour to prep, 1 hour to tone down is from my sales days. And that's something that I always bring in. And I think many folks, especially in our profession, are surprised to hear when a manager is saying, of course, you're going to take at least 3 hours all to yourself, whatever that is, right? That I think that that's a way to be very clear, not only to provide your teams with ownership, but this idea that, you know, to create habits for wellness takes time. And this is why, and actually it was one of the great lessons for me coming into a union environment, this idea that, oh, wait a minute, as a union employee, you have 1 hour lunch, you have certain set hours. And I think for many of us in our profession where you're doing more than ever expected and not taking your full hour, but taking 15 minutes, it makes a difference. And then the other was hopefully to really set the example, set the tone, for everything from how you're taking care of yourself. How do you take a day off? And how that's an example to the rest of the team.
And we are here on our final question, this one for Ruth. How can I redirect workplace gossip using empathy?
Thank you, Karina. This is something I hold very close to my heart because, in this conversation about culture and how do we evolve the office culture to this place of inclusion and where everyone wants to be. I think it matters that we serve as the example, as I said earlier. There are some folks in institutions that really the only topic of conversation when they get you by the water cooler is what the other person's doing who showed up late. Meanwhile, they really actually have work to do, right? Or on the flip side, the idea that there are certain relationships that are so endemic in a culture where, people are actually paying attention to how someone who went into so and so's office and so on. And I think each of us is responsible for redirecting those conversations. Everything from, hopefully being empathetic on why that person feels that they need to speak about someone else's schedule, for example, like if it's directly impacting them. For leaders, hopefully you are able to provide some supports in terms of, why do you have one person paying attention to someone else's schedule? Then maybe that person is really being impacted by the person who always shows up late, by the person who's always in the restroom, seminar room, or anywhere else but their desk when it's all sort of all hands on deck. And then for the folks who, you're trying to build relationships, I mentioned earlier about how hard it is to want to be included if you're a person who everyone around you has been working there for 10 and 20 and 30 years. Hopefully being by the water cooler, talking about a movie or an art show or a particular event at the library is a way to build friendships and really become part of a community. But I think that it's twofold where we need to be, and how mindful I think as leaders we need to be able to affect culture.
All right, thank you everyone for your wisdom and experience. If we were in person, I'd say round of applause for our panelists. I believe now we have the question and answer portion of our event. If you have questions, please pop them in the chat.
There are no questions in the chat yet, but yes, you can type them in there. Or if you're really feeling bold and you want to unmute yourself or raise your hand, we'll get you in there. I wanted to thank all the panelists as well. You did an outstanding job. I know it can be difficult to reflect on your own experiences when thinking of what you should share with a group like this. And it's very, very touching what you came up with, and very, very practical advice. So thank you.